Clutha came to India on a private visit in September 1939, the fateful month which saw the commencement of World War II. His experiences during this visit made him realize the dire need of establishing some rehabilitation services for the Indian servicemen blinded during World War I, on the pattern of St. Dunstan's in London. It is a recorded fact of history that they received nothing except an insignificant amount by way of a special allowance in addition to their pension. The special allowance was made possible by a lump sum given to the Indian Soldiers' Board by the St. Dunstans. It was, however, a challenging as well as a tempting task. It was challenging since Indians happened to be fatalists to a large extent and accepted even their handicap as a consequence of their own misdeeds in their previous life. It was tempting since the entire field was open to him and there could be no opposition to his enterprise because of his British background. Eventually, Clutha stayed in India for nearly a decade. His love affair from 1940 to 1948 with the country proved to be mutually fruitful. It resulted in the establishment of rehabilitation services for the blind of different age groups based on sound principles, and it catapulted him to an expert on blind welfare. His stature became truly international. Para. In 1942, when the country was galvanizing on the political front after the Quit India movement, a silent revolution was taking shape in the field of rehabilitation for the blind, partly because of the compulsions generated by World War II. At that time, Clutha was busy in giving some shape to his work in India. Page 68. He had established a good rapport with a number of persons in the government and outside. It was against this background that a cable was sent by the Government of India to Lord Fraser of the St. Dunstans in London with a request to spare half of Clutha's time for looking into the problems of Indian blind and formulating plans for their rehabilitation during the war as well as in the post-war era. The request was readily granted. The following year, he was appointed as a special officer by the Department of Education, Health and Lands of the Government of India to, open inverted commas, investigate the extent of blindness in India and its cause and to carry out a survey of the existing societies for the education of the blind children and of the means of employing trained blind men and women in sheltered industries and prepare a scheme for the creation of a national organization for the blind of India. Close inverted commas. He embarked upon the gigantic task assigned to him with his usual zeal and might and submitted his interim report in April. He held this position up to 1947. Para. Open brackets. It would be appropriate to make it clear at this stage that during all these years he was playing a dual role, since he was also representing the St. Dunstans as its sole representative. The temporary rank of Lieutenant Colonel was conferred on him to add to his stature. He retained it till 1948. Close brackets. Para. In view of its proximity to the national capital, comparatively pleasant climate, and assurance of giving old quarters and some land by the military authorities of the St. Dunstans, Dehradun was selected as the headquarters by Clutha for his work. St. Dunstan's Hostel for the Indian servicemen came into existence on 9th June 1943. It received its first trainee the following day. It was Havildar Abdul Karim. Page 69. It first functioned in a bungalow at 54 Rajpur Road and was later transferred to 116 Rajpur Road, a place which was earlier used as a POW internment camp. Its strength rose to 20 trainees within 2 months and to over 70 inmates by the end of the second year. It was taken over by the Government of India in 1950 and it blossomed into a National Institute for the Visually Handicapped in 1979. Para. Clutha received generous support from people in the government and outside. Lord Archibald Percival Wavell, then Viceroy of India, was particularly kind to him. He not only gave him moral support, but also the place he wanted for his activities. He was perhaps keen to extend his support to this noble cause because of his resounding failures in Middle East and Far East as Commander-in-Chief, and in view of his own visual impairment. Clutha received the Kaisar-e-Hind Gold Medal in 1947 for his commendable services in India. Para. Clutha left active politics after a short span in the early 1920s. He was an excellent worker and a true friend of the sightless. Yet, he did manifest certain traits which revealed that he suffered from racial superiority to some extent. Mr. Lal Advani, the first instructor at the St. Dunstan's Hostel for the Indian War Blinded at Dehradun, who later rose to the position of Director, National Institute for the Visually Handicapped, thinks that he was, within brackets, highly racial. Mr. Advani was given a, within inverted commas, dungeon, while a British instructor of the same status was provided with a much superior accommodation. It shows he discriminated against the non-whites. In his report on blindness in China, he recommended that a foreigner should head the Commission on Rehabilitation Services for the Blind in China. One wonders why he considered a Chinese incapable of heading such a commission. Page 70. Obviously, he suffered from racial superiority, and he was perhaps also trying to promote himself since his agreement in India was about to end. Para. A number of Braille codes were being used in different schools in India before independence. It generated a great deal of hardship for the blind. The Central Advisory Board of Education, therefore, appointed a committee in 1941 to consider this incongruous situation. It met in November the same year to decide upon the basic guidelines for a uniform Braille code and thought it fit to appoint a smaller committee of experts for drawing up the actual code. The expert committee, consisted of 5 persons, was appointed in 1942. It drew a code and submitted its report in 1943, which was approved in 1945 by the CABE. A uniform Indian Braille code thus came into existence. Para. The same year, an informal group under the leadership of Clutha finalized the standard Indian Braille code and challenged the official uniform Indian Braille. So in April 1946, a meeting was arranged between the informal group and the members of the expert committee to resolve the differences. But it could not reach an agreement acceptable to both the parties. Para. Consequently, the Government of India decided to request the UNESCO to consider the issue in a dispassionate and scientific manner. Clutha was appointed by the UNESCO as its consultant in 1949. It was through his untiring efforts that an international conference on Braille was organized at Paris in March 1950 to enunciate the broad principles for drawing up the Braille codes in different languages. He played a significant role in subsequent regional conferences on Braille also. Page 71. He became the chairman of the World Braille Council in 1952, which was established to serve as a, within inverted commas, clearinghouse for the, within inverted commas, interpretation and application of Braille principles. Para. Thus, it can be said that Clutha contributed immensely to the drawing up of Braille codes in different languages based on certain uniform principles, although there are still many problems to be solved in this vital field. Para. Clutha left the field of journalism in 1919, but he continued to nurture a passion for writing. In addition to his book, The Tale of a Trooper, which has already been referred to in December 1965, barely 3 months before his departure from the mortal world, he completed the biography of his father. And he was already working on his own autobiography. One of his letters, written on the 31st December 1965 to a former colleague at Dehradun, however, gives the impression that he was doubtful about completing it. But he was happy to report in the same letter that, open inverted commas, life goes quietly and pleasantly on our farm here in the country, close inverted commas. He was happy to have his daughter Elizabeth near him. Para. Clutha suffered a stroke during the 3rd week of March 1966, but he continued to attend to his work. He died on 27th March the same year. Para. Sir Clutha Mackenzie, a prolific writer, a tenacious fighter, reputed expert on blind welfare, and a towering intellectual, received a number of awards and honors. He has been a source of inspiration for many and will continue to be so in future.